So week one of free agency is in the books, and to be quite honest, it's kind of been a slower, quieter free agency to this point. Free agency is always an interesting and exciting time, no matter how slow or fast or explosive it may or may not be, but it's definitely always a time of excitement, right? Because of the fact that there's so much that could possibly change and transition in the off-season period, we always kind of look to it to be a little bit more explosive, a little bit more exciting. But to this point, it's been relatively slow, some action here and there. And with that being said, without further ado, I wanted to kind of take a look at what we have seen to this point. And like I said, since free agency's been a little slower, I kind of wanted it to be a more comprehensive look at the rest of the league, a look around the league as it pertains to transactions that have been made this offseason, and kind of giving each one of these teams a grade or how I believe they've performed in terms of what they've done so far this offseason, given the resources that they have and the standing that they had last season coming into this incoming season, if you will. So I'm going to get it started out east, specifically in the Atlantic Division. So once again, I'm grading these teams based off the assets that they have available, right? Their standing coming into last year, and taking that into account of how they may approach this offseason coming into next season as well, and then also seeing how they address the weaknesses and the needs that are still on each respective team, and how they went about trying to address it and fix it, right? So like I said, starting the Atlantic Division here with Boston, right? Boston, I gave them an A because at the end of the day, they are the standard, right? They are, to me, the cream of the crop. They're the reigning defending champions. So at the end of the day, what it comes down to is, were they able to retain the pieces that were instrumental in making them the reigning defending champions this past season? And the way that I look at it, the answer is a resounding yes, right? Jason Tatum, the most notable out of all of the re-signings / extensions that Boston made, is he signed a 5-year, $315 million extension with the Celtics to remain in Boston. So, keeping that pairing of him and Brown together, to me, is super important. They played well together this past postseason, so definitely feel as though keeping that tandem together was key and instrumental, although at the end of the day, Tatum was still assigned for another year, but extending him and ensuring the fact that they're going to remain together for at least the foreseeable future, to me, was key. Another guy that they were also able to retain was Derek White. He signed a 4-year extension, right? And then they also kept Neemias Queta along with Xavier Tillman and Luke Cornett. So retaining key pillars of their roster, because a lot of those guys, like the Drew Holidays of the world, the Al Horfords of the world, were not up for, free agency. Drew Holiday had signed that extension earlier in the season. So at the end of the day, Boston keeps the core and key members of that championship team, for at least for the foreseeable future. But at the end of the day, though, there is some level of concern about keeping all the guys that they have on that roster together, especially with the new CBA and, the aprons. But so far, in how they're going to look next year, I definitely think they still look as strong and as dominant as they did this past season. So definitely going to give them an A grade based off, retaining the key pieces, like signing Tatum to an extension, like signing Derek White to an extension. Those really matter to me, and I think they make the most amount of sense in keeping Boston at the top as it pertains to the East and the entire NBA, as they are the reigning world champions. Next, if you take a look at New York, I wanted to key in on specifically because of obviously the big trade that they made for Mikal Bridges. So the New York Knicks were able to acquire Mikal Bridges. Now, honestly, let me take a step back, actually. Let me bring it back for a second, right? Taking a look at the entire Atlantic Division, I gave the Knicks a B grade, and I gave the Sixers a B grade, and I'll delve into why the Knicks specifically got a B grade. I went in depth about how I like the Paul George deal for the Sixers, and I had kind of the Knicks and the Sixers grouped in the same tiers that I will go over towards the end of this video. but I definitely felt like those B grades were earned. Now, most people who are seeing the Brooklyn Nets with a B grade are probably a little confused, but as we delve into the Mikal Bridges trade, you're going to see why I felt like they earned that B grade specifically. So let's unpack that Mikal Bridges trade, right? So the Knicks were able to acquire Mikal Bridges from the Brooklyn Nets. They acquired him along with Keita Bates-Diop and a 2026 second-round pick, along with the draft rights to Juan Pablo Valle, right, in exchange for what I believe is a haul, right? Look at that. Look at all that they received in this graphic here. Bojan Bogdanovic, Mamadi Diakite, Shake Milton, an unprotected first-round pick in 2025, and another unprotected first-round pick in 2027, another unprotected first-round pick in 2029, and another unprotected first-round pick in 2031, along with an unprotected pick swap in 2028, and a top 4 protected 2025 first-round pick from Milwaukee. That's about 6 picks for a team in Brooklyn that, yes, is not in contention and is currently in the midst of a rebuild. But what better way to jumpstart that rebuild than by stockpiling those first-round picks? And to me, this is, respectfully to Mikal Bridges, who is a very fine player, a gross overpay. But when you are a team like the New York Knicks and you take a step back and you evaluate the Eastern Conference landscape, like I said in my tiers, they are right below Boston, right? They're right below Boston, in my opinion. They wanted to go for it and cash all their chips in, and what better way to do that than, go all in on another wing player like Mikal Bridges. The wing players in today's NBA, to me, are so crucial, right? They're so important because wings with size who can defend, specifically when you're trying to build a team to compete or contend with the defending champion Celtics, you need wing players. You need guys that can kind of put your team in a position to contend with the wings that have size of Boston, right? To contend with the Tatums of the world and the Browns of the world, because they're the heads of the snake as it pertains to Boston, right? And I think the Knicks, with not only having Mikal Bridges now, but also retaining OG Anunoby, which was a huge deal, keeping him and extending him to a 5-year, I believe it was a $212 million deal, along with guys like a Josh Hart, along with the star that they have in Jalen Brunson and Julius Randle, who was also injured last year, Mitchell Robinson in the middle as well. When you take a look at all those guys that they have on the team is, in my opinion, a very complete team, and we haven't even discussed Dante DiVincenzo, right? The reason I gave them a B rather than a B plus or an A is because of the loss of Isaiah Hartenstein. I think Isaiah Hartenstein, when it comes down to it, was huge for their team because of 2 big reasons, right? Number one, as a backup big, specifically when Randall and or Mitchell were both hurt, he was very much a serviceable big for them, in addition to the fact that his ability to offensive rebound is sorely going to be missed. Hartenstein signed a deal with Oklahoma City to leave the Knicks. So the reason why I arrived at that B grade was for the reason of losing Isaiah Hartenstein. I think that's definitely going to hurt them, especially when it comes to going up against the Philadelphias of the world and teams with bigs within the Eastern Conference, right? Or even the Western Conference as well, if they're fortunate enough to somehow make it past Boston. So definitely a key loss for them as it pertains to that. So, just like I said, just rounding out the rest of the Atlantic Division, like I said, you have Brooklyn that I gave a B, you have Philly that I gave a B. Philly, remember, if you can recall, they extended Tyrese Maxey, they extended Kelly Oubre, signed Paul George, also signed Andre Drummond along with Eric Gordon, and also recently signed Caleb Martin to a 4-year deal as well. Brooklyn, like I said, they extended Nick Claxton and also got a boatload of picks from the Mikal Bridges trade. And then Toronto, I arrived at a C for them because, at the end of the day, they're still rebuilding. They're still trying to put themselves in a position to, they already have the right culture as far as I'm concerned, but to kind of build on where they were last year, only a 25-win team, not the Toronto team we're accustomed to seeing. They did extend Emmanuel Quickley and Scotty Barnes. I definitely felt like those were positives as well, but I haven't seen any free agent signings that have wowed me, in addition to the fact that I'm not super high on the trades that they made for Davion Mitchell and Sasha Vezenkov. So at the end of the day, I do think Toronto will eventually improve, but I don't know if, in terms of weaknesses addressed this offseason, how much it's going to matter going into next season. So moving on to the Central Division. So as we make our way through the Central Division, you start to see what I was talking about, what I was referencing earlier, really manifest itself here if you take a look at the Central Division, right? Not a whole lot of signings, not a whole lot of activity, right, as it pertains to transactions so far this postseason, right? And I mean, let's get into it. Let's start it with Milwaukee, right? I gave them a C- because, you know, when I evaluate teams specifically as it pertains to teams within the conference, I put them in 4 buckets, right? There's obviously the teams that are rebuilding, right, that are trying to get themselves to establish the right culture. There are teams that are inconsistently making the playoffs or appearing in the postseason. So some years they're in, some years they're not, right? And then you have teams above that where it's like, okay, they are perennial playoff appearers, right? So they're in the playoffs literally almost every single year, but they tend to not make it past the first or second round. And then you have contenders, right? You have the teams that are very much in contention to win the conference. And if they make 1 or 2 moves, you know, can put themselves in a position to be the favorite in the conference, right? And where I have Milwaukee is in between that perennial playoff appear kind of threshold and the contender threshold. And, you know, they're there because, to me, after making that Damian Lillard trade, it was painfully evident that they lost a huge piece defensively when Drew Holiday was traded, right? So to me, they've been trying to fill that hole, fill that void, and I don't think they've gone about attempting to fill that void the right way to this point in the postseason. I don't know if DeLon Wright or Taurean Prince really moved the needle to get them back to being better defensively. And obviously the rookies that they're drafted, they're unproven commodities, right? And then in addition to that, they lost Malik Beasley, right? So that's why I gave them a C-. As it pertains to the Cavs. The Cavs, you know, they set out to have 2 main goals this offseason, right? And one of those goals was signing Donovan Mitchell to that 3-year extension. So they did that. Cool. Check that box, right? The next thing they wanted to do was hire a new head coach after firing J.B. Bickerstaff. Cool. They did that. They hired Kenny Atkinson. So they accomplished the 2 main goals that they had coming into this offseason, but haven't done much else aside from that for a team that has roster weaknesses that are actually very much an evident thing, right? So I'm not super impressed with them not doing much aside from retaining Donovan Mitchell and hiring head coach Kenny Atkinson. And I mean, I guess they did draft Jalen Tyson, but he's also, you know, these draft picks are very unproven. And because of that, I don't put much stock in those draft picks unless you're a rebuilding team looking to start to establish something new, and maybe you're looking for your next pillar of your franchise. But the Cavaliers are not in that position, so I gave them a B-. An argument could definitely be made for a lower grade, though. Moving on to the Pacers. The Pacers, I gave them a B. I like what they've done. They got Pascal Siakam locked up. They locked up Obi Toppin as well. They are taking a chance on James Wiseman. Look, I don't know why I have such an infatuation with James Wiseman. I think he can be a good player in the right system. I don't know why I continue to believe that, in terms of based off the fact that, you know, the last couple of places he's been, he hasn't had a whole lot of success. But I like them trying to take a chance on him. As far as weaknesses go, as it pertains to this Indiana Pacers team, I definitely think they weren't super far off. I think they maybe need another year of experience to maybe put themselves in a position to become a team that can, you know, challenge Boston to a degree, like a New York or a Philadelphia. I think they need 1 more year of experience to put themselves in that position. So I think just keeping the team intact is good enough for me, which is why I rank them at a B. The Chicago Bulls, you know, Chicago, they just don't make sense to me, right? They don't seem to have a sense of direction as it pertains to how they want to move with their roster. To me, it was painfully evident in years prior, like years leading up to this offseason, that the core of DeRozan, Levine, Vucevic, and Ball, who we haven't seen in quite some time, was never going to work. They were never even the 2nd or 3rd best team in the conference, right? So to me, the right thing to do would have been to break them up years ago, right? But now they're left with no choice as they've now executed a sign and trade for DeMar DeRozan. They traded him to the Sacramento Kings in exchange for Chris Duarte and 2 second-round picks. It's a 3-team deal, so the Spurs received Harrison Barnes in a 2031 unprotected pick swap from Sacramento for that deal to work. So Chicago, like I said, they're a team that kind of just to me is very directionless. Don't know what they want to do. Don't know what direction they want to go in. And like I said, they should have broken up that core years ago. And now they're having trouble moving Zach LaVine due to the contract that he's on and the injury concerns in addition to that, right? And then you have Lonzo Ball, who, like I said, we haven't seen in quite some time, right? So kind of directionless. I'm back and forth between a C for them because they did get something out of the DeMar DeRozan sign and trade and Chris Duarte, who does fit their schedule to a degree in terms of he's a young guy who can shoot the ball, who you can put next to Josh Giddey along with Patrick Williams and kind of see if you can't build a young core out of that, but not very promising outlook for Chicago. And then we move to Detroit, right? A team that is clearly in the midst of a rebuild, right? They did find a way to extend Cade Cunningham along with Simone Fontecchio, right? Signed Tobias Harris, signed Malik Beasley, claimed Paul Reed off of waivers, traded for Tim Hardaway Jr., Wendell Moore, kind of like some salary fillers there, and then hired a head coach that will help them reestablish a culture in JB Bickerstaff, right? Like I said, JB Bickerstaff is your guy for sure if you want to reestablish or instill a new culture that prides itself on the defensive side of the ball. I think JB is your guy, and I really, really like that hiring for Detroit. So still a rebuilding team, but I do think they're taking steps in the right direction. So that is my view on the Central Division. Moving on, finally we get to the Southeast Division, and right off the bat, the team I'm keying in on here is the Orlando Magic, right? I love what they've done. They extended guys who needed to be extended, specifically as it pertains to Franz Wagner, Jonathan Isaac, and even Mo Wagner. Core rotational pieces that I think are going to play a big role and continued success. Even Gary Harris, keeping him and locking him down to me was a big deal. And then signing Kentavious Caldwell-Pope for a 3-year deal, I think is going to be key as well. When you look at KCP, the specific acquisition of getting him was crucial because if you take a look at his stats, specifically his shooting stats last year, 46% from the field, 40.6% from three. He's a career almost 37% free three-point shooter, right? And shot 39.7% on catch-and-shoot threes last season, 44% on wide-open threes, and 54% on tightly contested threes, right? So when you take a look at what he can bring, what he can provide for Orlando next year, I definitely think that shooting element that Orlando was lacking, specifically that was painfully evident in that series against Cleveland, will definitely be rectified to a degree by signing him, right? I also like the acquisition of Tristan Da Silva in the draft, right? They drafted him 18th overall, and in his senior season at Colorado, 16 points a game, 39.5% from three. He's a big 6'8" wing, almost power forward type player who is great at shooting the three and can cut and can defend, right? So he fits right into that mold for Orlando, and I think he'll make an impact right away, especially like being a 4-year college guy who now kind of plays a little bit more experience than, the underclassmen. I think it makes a big difference for Orlando in signing him. So I gave them a B. Miami, I gave them a B-, right? Extending Bam was a big deal. Keeping Kevin Love was good. Keeping Haywood Highsmith was good for them. Also signed Alec Burks. And I like the rookie selection of Khalil Ware in the draft at 15th overall. They did lose Caleb Martin to Philly, though. So overall, I gave them a B-. Not anything that they can do to move the needle for me personally. And then you have Atlanta. That gave them a C. They did sign and trade DeJounte Murray to New Orleans, and they in that sign and trade acquired E.J. Liddell, Dyson Daniels, Larry Nance Jr., and Cody Zeller. So, solid, but not anything that's moving the needle there as well. And then you have the Charlotte Hornets. Charlotte, another team that's kind of directionless. I don't know what it is they are trying to accomplish, what it is they're trying to put together. It's not clear at this point as far as when one takes an outside look, an objective look at Charlotte. I mean, they did extend Miles Bridges. They traded for Josh Green and Reggie Jackson, selected Tidjane Saloon with the 6th overall pick. Nothing really there to move the needle for me, especially for a team that only won 21 games last year. So I'm not really phased by whatever it is or moved by whatever it is that they did this offseason to this point. They did hire head coach Charles Lee, and I think that'll definitely help them because of, his background in Boston. So we'll see what happens there. And then you have the Wizards, right? The Wizards, even though they finished worse than the Hornets, I think they're in a little bit better shape, right? Getting a Jonas Valanciunas was a big deal for me, and also getting Malcolm Brogdon, kind of experienced guys, solid professional players that I think will make a difference, in addition to having Alex Sarr selected in the second overall pick in this year's draft, Bub Carrington, and Keyshawn George. So 3 first-round picks that may or may not make an impact this season, especially as it pertains to Alex Sarr. So very interested to see what they did. I gave them a C- because, like I said, I do think they're trying to trend in the right direction. They are clearly in the midst of a rebuild, and I think they're definitely doing what they can to put themselves in a position to succeed. And they also have a new coach. They hired Brian Keefe there as well. So I gave them a C-. We'll see what actually happens for them this season. So with all this change and transition that we've seen to this point as it pertains to free agency and transactions made before free agency and even up to now, how does the East look, right? And I think when you take a look at it, the first tier is Boston being in the league of their own, right? They're the reigning champs. Nobody is touching them. So if no one's touching them, can the team at least scare them and put them in a position to sweat to some degree, right? And I think these two teams in New York and Philly, I go back and forth between who is the better of those teams, are teams that can scare Boston and maybe upset them, right? So I'll put them in that tier right below Boston. You have contending to contend, and I put those teams that are there because there are a lot of teams in this group, right? You have Milwaukee, Indiana, Miami, Cleveland, and Orlando. All 5 of these teams can definitely be in a position where they could beat maybe a New York or a Philly and maybe find themselves in the conference final against Boston. But at the same time, I don't think they're better overall teams than New York and Philadelphia, right? But they can, if they make 1 or 2 moves, to put them in a position to challenge those teams in the tier above, right? And then below that, you have the teams that are trying to find themselves, right? The Torontos, the Atlantas, who are kind of doing a good job of, not a good job, but like they're inconsistent, right? Year to year, you don't know what you're getting out of them. They could be a playoff team / play-in team, or they might only win 25 games, right? So they're trying to find themselves, but they're not rebuilding and they're not directionless, right? And then you have the actual rebuilding teams, Brooklyn, with the picks that they acquired, the Wizards hiring a new coach and getting Jonas Valanciunas, getting guys who can establish a culture in terms of, Jonas and Malcolm Brogdon as well, right, along with just being a very young team with drafting Alex Sarr and the 2 other first-rounders that they have. Then you have Detroit that's also clearly rebuilding as well, right, hiring Coach Bickerstaff to help establish that culture of defense and toughness that I think he'll instill there as well. And then you have the directionless, right, the Charlotte Hornets of the world and the Chicago Bulls, where I have absolutely no clue what direction they want to go in, or I don't even think they have a clue what direction they want to go in, and are having a tough time trying to figure that out, and because of that find themselves in a less than favorable position in terms of where they are within the conference. So that is, to me, the state of the East based off week 1 of free agency. Let me know what you think in the comment section below. Let me know if you agree or disagree, right? But please definitely leave a like and subscribe, and I'll see you next time. But until next time, we hope you keep it inside the lines.